Thriving a state of being is our topic for the month, for the prosperity principles that we teach, that we want to learn how to put into practice or expand the way in which we're putting it into practice. And we chose this theme, thriving a state of being, because of course, as you know, you may recall, our whole year, our annual theme is emergence. So we've been paying attention to what's emerging in our own life in CSLDallas, looking at the things that may be emerging around us. Once things emerge, right, you plant the seeds, they start to pop up out of the ground. Once they emerge, we thought, well, what comes next? Thriving, right? Those things that we grow, we cultivate them, we fertilize them, we water them, we take care of them so that they will thrive. And so this is so much more than just a prosperity opportunity to focus on a specific thing, specific amount of money or a specific good or form or material possession that we might want to have or feel like we need to have, all of which is perfectly lovely, and all of the principles and tools that we're going to talk about absolutely apply. But ultimately, as Randy so beautifully said, it's about building a prosperity consciousness, a life that works. Right? Our global vision says we're about building a world that works for everyone and lives that work for each of us. And that means for our lives to thrive individually, collectively, and in this beautiful planet, among this beautiful global family that we're a part of. So we're really focusing on how do we apply these principles in a bit of a larger way around our life as a whole. And as I said, each one of these things and these ways in which we look at it can be applied to specifics when and as we choose. So the first thing we need to do is to take a look at this word thrive. We had a lot of interesting conversations as we were talking about this theme, and we came up with grow and flourish and lots of different words playing with this idea of emergence. And of course, we came to thriving. So I had to look up the definition of thrive. Thrive is to grow vigorously, to flourish, to grow vigorously, not spindly, not sort of, right? To grow vigorously, to gain in wealth or possessions, so therefore to prosper, and to progress toward or realize a goal despite or because of circumstances. I know we've certainly had some circumstances recently, haven't we? We have had a good 5, 6, 8, 10 years of some pretty interesting circumstances, and are facing quite a few more as we look into the future. And that's individually and collectively, of course. And so this idea of flourishing and prospering, there's something vibrant around it. There's something about this idea of thriving despite circumstances. Or maybe we could say that as we focus on overcoming circumstances, situations, challenges in our life, we actually are in fact thriving. We're thriving as we have the ability to move through the circumstances, not to avoid them. Our spirituality is not a bypass of life. Our spirituality does not, this was so annoying when I figured this out. Going on a spiritual path does not mean a long, steady uphill climb into nirvana. I thought if I really did it right, I would never again, ever have any problems. And ultimately, I would no longer ever need to do spiritual mind treatment or an affirmation about anything. Ha, ha, ha. Because we're embodied souls having lives. right? And you just look at nature. There's flooding, there's hurricanes, there's volcanoes, there's lightning, there's a deer that comes and nibbles and nibbles back down to the ground. All of that stuff is going on, and yet, barring human interference, nature does thrive and it flourishes. Actually, some of the most amazing rejuvenation in nature is when there's a wildfire or a volcano. Of course, we have exacerbated that so much that it's now perhaps a little too much. But there is this idea that we thrive when we are willing to grasp life, not be afraid of it, not avoid it, not try to use our spirituality to get out of it, but to embrace the journey and to expect good to happen. At every level, to expect good to happen, despite or because of their circumstances. So we picked thriving, a state of being, partly because it has this twofold idea that we're going to be playing with all month. First of all, it is a declaration of absolute truth. Life is forever working to thrive. It is forever moving towards a flourishing life. It is forever moving through whatever obstacles or challenges and growing. So we can see that in any field, in any garden, in any forest, even in the desert. The minute the rain comes, there's this extraordinary bloom, and then everything waits for the next rain. It is a declaration of truth that life is inherently designed to thrive, which means it's inherently designed to move through and over obstacles and manifest more life. Now, that may be true, but sometimes we're not experiencing that. So thriving as a state of being, this is also an affirmation. This is the cornerstone affirmation that we're going to invite you to engage in this month. As we start growing our prosperity consciousness, we actually want to grow this deep embodiment that thriving is a state of being. Actually, it's the state of our being. That is the native essential truth of who we are in our lives. So we want to invite you to really focus on and own this particular affirmation. I'm thriving through the challenges. I'm thriving. I've been promoted. I'm thriving. My life is thriving. My kids have turned a corner. I'm thriving. I'm learning how to deal with a physical condition. I'm thriving. We're moving. Do you see what I'm saying? To really keep this in front of us so that we can hook our affirmation to our actual state of being. So this thriving a state of being is both an affirmation and a declaration of truth. Now, I want to read you this beautiful quote from Ernest Holmes. Hang on. Oh, no, before I do that. Thriving. Okay, I want to talk about this for a minute. So, I'm going to read you Ernest Holmes' quote. Okay, we're going to come back to this. This is Ernest Holmes. I love this. To become alive and build the greatest lives, we must become something more, something worthwhile. This is Ernest Holmes writing about himself. There is not a day in my life that goes by that I do not take the time to unify myself in my consciousness with big things. To think I am one with all activities, all industries, all commerce, and just feel that thought reaching out and encompassing the largest fields of activity of the world. Then you are one with the infinite stars in the heavens, and that is to see things. It is that in our mental attitude that decides what we are to become, and nothing else. If you could feel your mental concept of your business touch the universal, You would only have to speak the word, and it would come to you in a ceaseless stream. That's a prosperity consciousness. And that's the building of a prosperity consciousness. We must become something more, something worthwhile. And this is why we want you to focus on this affirmation of thriving. We can contribute so much more when we know that we are thriving. We can savor our lives so much more when we know we are thriving. We can move through anything when we affirm that we are thriving. And so this idea that we keep moving into something larger in our own minds invites us to really take a look at where in our lives are we thriving and maybe where we're not. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So Abraham Maslow was one of the first psychologists who decided, rather than focusing on people who were neurotic or psychotic or just really seriously traumatized, he would actually focus on people who were basically living ordinary lives, right? Doesn't mean we don't have trauma, doesn't mean we don't have our own anxiety and a little bit of neurosis, but, right, not clinically over into that realm of having life really not work well. But just ordinary people. He studied ordinary people. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs talks about what we require to thrive. These are actually things that our humanness requires for that spiritual truth of thriving to be revealed in our lives. Right? So we have physiological needs, which is all the basic food, shelter, clothing, enough money, all of those kinds of things. We have safety needs, which means security, a little bit of money in the bank for when we retire, having a sense that we are protected, that we live in a safe universe, love and belonging, that we have community and friendships and relationships that are meaningful. And each one of these things is adds a more full experience of thriving to our lives. Esteem is feeling as though what we do is worthwhile, and we know that it's worthwhile because we actually receive acknowledgement or recognition, or we have a sense that what we are doing, we can see that it's seriously contributing, and ultimately self-actualization, right? You may have heard it as the peak experience, right? When we have those moments where we really feel as though we're living our best life, we're living our greater yet to be, we're manifesting parts of that, even if we have moments of that and then we fall back into something that isn't working as well. So we're constantly throughout our life, we're building this pyramid of ways in which we are handling these needs. And one of the things that is kind of missing from the list is that all of this is easier to do when we have a spiritual grounding. When we have a spiritual source and a spiritual understanding of how this works, all of these are a little easier to rely on and a little easier to trust, because we know that life itself, spirit itself, is seeking to express fully as each one of us, wanting for our lives to be the full expression that they can be. When we examine our thriving, it's really valuable to examine where on this pyramid are we thriving and where are we struggling. And sometimes we can become so spiritually focused, we can focus so much on love and esteem and self-actualization that we forget to focus on our base needs, our basic needs. It's when we are always turning to, well, I'm just going to love everybody and I'm going to be, that's what it's all going to be about, right? We can forget that we actually also have to take care of our physiological needs. We have to take care of ourselves. We do actually have to make sure that we're taking care of our money, our finances, that we're taking care of our long-term planning, because ultimately this is our life that we're building. And the more fully all of this is thriving, the greater of a contribution that we can make. The deeper our gift that we are is able to be given. So it's really appropriate for those of you who are in our home study groups, you're going to spend some time exploring this very thing and asking ourselves, where am I thriving? Where am I struggling? I noticed for myself for years, I had a low but kind of ongoing struggle with the financial piece of it. And I realized, well, yeah, that's because I'm constantly saying money isn't important. So I've just said that whole bottom row, physiological needs, yeah, not really paying much attention to that. So my whole pyramid was shaky. Do you see how that works? And even in safety needs, where we're making sure that in a crisis we can buy the new car, or fix the car, or, do what needs to be done, and it's not this overwhelming, oh my God, what's going to happen now, right? As we are focusing on these, it actually strengthens our ability to have these higher needs met in a long-term, stable way. So this is one of the biggest reasons why we focus on prosperity and abundance, because it's part of that basic need that we have in life so that our lives work. And when our lives work, we can contribute in an entirely different way to a world that works, which is, of course, what's required of us these days, isn't it? So, I want to share with you, building on Abraham Maslow's work, and New Thought has had a huge impact in this over the last 100 years, and that is a move towards a positive psychology, recognizing that it doesn't always work to think about how broken we are or what's wrong with us and how we are, Locke said it best. He said, all life is, people's lives are just nasty, brutish, and short. 17th century philosopher from the continent, right? And there are a lot of people who have bought into that and still buy into it. How many of you have seen the bumper sticker, life's a bitch and then you die? That is the current contemporary version of Locke and Hume's idea. And it completely misses the spiritual aspect that we are here to contribute and that our lives are intended to blossom. So I'm going to read this. I just want to read you a few paragraphs from this article from the American Psychologist. In this first century edition of American Psychologist, it was dedicated to the burgeoning field of positive psychology and predicted that psychology would gravitate away from the study of malaise and toward wellness, thriving, figuring out how to thrive rather than just survive. Since then, countless studies on wellness have been published in scientific journals. Although scientists haven't completely reached a consensus, mostly because they forget about the spiritual piece, but they are still working on it. Thriving can, in fact, be something quite specific. So here's their definition of thriving. It may involve resilience, for example, but doesn't necessarily just refer to overcoming obstacles or a rise out of hardship. And it's distinguished from prospering because thriving involves evolution, whereas prospering only denotes success, essentially financial. I really want you to hear that. When we're working on our prosperity principles and our prosperity consciousness, we're not working on just success. Oh, look, I've arrived. Or to be able to point at a certain physical, material manifestation and say, now I'm prosperous because I've been successful in manifesting this thing. No, those things are simply a part of the creation of a thriving life, of a life of well-being, and it includes evolution. The evolving idea of what thriving means to you. The evolving idea of how you seek to manifest that. The evolving idea that we have about who we are, who we've come here to be, and what our contribution is. In other words, okay, here's the little zinger. In other words, if you're just coasting, doing the unchallenging thing that you do well, you're not thriving because you're not developing. Similarly, if you're performing well and trying tough stuff, but you're perpetually stressed and not enjoying yourself, that's a success of a kind that doesn't count as thriving. I had to read that paragraph twice, and I had to think to myself, how many times do I find myself stressed and not really enjoying because I'm pushing towards something? And how often do we pray for ease and grace because we want to be comfortable? We don't want to move and develop and grow. This is one of the reasons why we hook this conversation with our pledge program. As many of the people who've been around for a while, who have chosen to pledge, who have chosen to use this time to develop a regular practice of using the law of giving and receiving and of growing, developing the prosperity consciousness, which means giving a little more and then a little more and then a little more, they will tell you the extraordinary experience that comes when a life is thriving through this the development of a prosperity consciousness practice. Do you see? That's why these two things are hooked together, so that you can use the pledge program not only to support a community that you love, support the programs and services that we have here, but so that you can not coast. If you're just coasting, doing the unchallenging thing that you do well, drop a little bit of money in the basket, whatever it is, you're not thriving because you're not developing. The developing doesn't have to be an unending belief that we're improving because we need to be fixed. No, it's because we're constantly being invited to grow, expand, become more of who we have come here to be, more of that infinite life, that love, that joy and peace and presence that is moving as us in the world. Now, as we said with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can be thriving in some areas and struggling in others, right? And so one of the things we'll also talk about is how you can borrow from one area to and apply it to another. But their general outline of what's required to thrive is this: optimism, motivation, proactivity, an enjoyment of learning, flexibility, adaptability, spirituality or religiosity, social competency, and self-esteem. You might look at that list. Are you generally motivated but not necessarily optimistic? Are you generally optimistic but maybe not very proactive? Are you proactive and motivated and you enjoy learning, but maybe flexibility and adaptability are a little challenging because you like things to be the way they're supposed to be, right? And how important our spirituality is and our social engagement is, and of course, the way in which we feel about ourselves. So part of our program, I think the fourth week, we're going to be talking about, or fourth and fifth week, about our self-esteem. Prosperity is a big reflection. Our prosperity is a big reflection of how we feel about ourselves, either as the living, breathing incarnation of the infinite love, or something very separate and unworthy. So it's worth thinking about these things. And again, not bad or good, but to notice where am I thriving and where am I struggling? Cindy Trim says this: life was designed for you to thrive, not survive. Survivors just get by. Thrivers actually live. Right? And that's that willingness to embrace challenge, overcome challenge, be optimistic, be motivated, be proactive, engage with it, and not falter in the moment when all of our resilience and all of our chutzpah is required. So this opportunity that we have all month is to expand our engagement with a thriving life, to experience it as a state of being, to keep coming back to it as an affirmation, and as we practice the prosperity principles, to apply them not just specifically, but to our life as a whole. For those of you who are in a home study group, you've gotten your stuff. It's an amazing program to help you work through it. For those of you that are not in a home study group, we do have just a one-page opportunity for you to do some deeper exploration with us throughout the month. So come along for the ride. Thriving is your state of being.